I tell her. As she nervously looks toward my door, I can see that she is wearing the same expression that the last tenant had, and that I must have had as well. Those initial weeks. She asked me directly yesterday if I had seen anything out of the ordinary. Like before, I paused, but this time I found myself saying no rather than confirming her anxieties. Nothing out of the ordinary. It seemed natural and effortless, as if someone else were speaking through me. Or perhaps I was the one, and the once distinct object had grown so entwined that its denials had become part of me. I'm not sure when my fear subsided. Perhaps it happened gradually, as in the subtle focusing of those hazy details. Perhaps the realization that the monster beneath your bed is actually the shadow of your own dangling foot was abrupt. Or perhaps terror simply changed into something else. Acceptance, acknowledgement, and a sort of dreadful closeness with something that has been observing you from the opposite side of every reflection and knows you better than you do. This morning, the coffee pot is full once more. I pour 2 mugs and proceed to the record rack, where my reflection is waiting for me through the window in the morning light. Together, we sip coffee that tastes like my grandmother's cooking, like safety that never truly existed, and like memory. Our face is finally focusing in the glass. The 4th story. When I located the station, the Texas sun had been dead for 3 hours. It was merely a concrete box squatting next to Highway 90, like something the desert had coughed up and forgotten, with no signs to indicate its existence. Everything was painted a sickly yellow paler, and my skin turned the color of old newspapers as the fluorescent lights inside flickered with that certain frequency that makes your teeth hurt. My throat felt like it had been gargling sand. I had been driving for 6 hours straight, and my water bottle had been empty since Sanderson. When I pushed inside, the bell above the door began to chime, but it continued to do so. There was a constant mechanical tremor, as though the clapper had become caught in the middle of its swing, instead of the joyous ding-ding of arrival. As I was waiting for someone to come behind the counter, the sound pierced my skull. With the bills spread out like playing cards, the register remained open. The liquid in a coffee pot, which had likely been cooking there since the morning or possibly longer, was thick and black like motor oil as it gurgled on a hot plate. The ringing ceased, with my boots resonating against what may have once been white linoleum that had become yellow like teeth. I made my way to the coolers at the rear. I could see condensation pouring in almost intentional rivulets through the glass doors of the refrigerator, which hummed with mechanical strain, as if someone were creating patterns from within. Even though the air coming from the vents was frigid, the water bottles felt warm to the touch. In any case, I grabbed 2. That's when he came in. This time, the door did not ring. I only saw him in the corner of my eye. He wasn't looking at the energy drinks, but he could see a figure in a worn denim jacket approaching them. I could see his gaze following my hand as I reached for a 3rd bottle in the curved reflection of the glass door. His reflection moved with me when I moved to the left, keeping the ideal angle so he could observe without appearing to observe. I walked over to the counter. His footfall were weirdly out of time with his movements as he slipped behind me, always keeping 2 aisles between us. When he stood motionless, I could hear him walking. When he moved, there was silence. The primordial awareness that comes from millions of years of being prey pricked my neck. The register was still accessible. The counter is still empty. I made my way to the door after leaving a 20 next to the coffee pot. He trailed behind. The parking area outside seemed smaller than it had been when I first came, as though the desert had gotten closer while I was inside. Under a street light that had never been on before, my automobile sat by itself. The light bulb is now emitting the same awful yellow fluorescence as the store. It was perfectly surrounded by moths, and their shadows made almost letter-like designs on my windshield. I opened the door. Too many times the click echoed. Initially only outlines. 2 forms emerged from behind the ice maker, but moving into the light, they gained substance. Their feet made noises that didn't correspond with their steps, and they walked with the same unsynchronized gait as the man inside. One was dressed in what appeared to be a dust-colored postal outfit. The garments on the other one seemed to move and blur when I tried to focus on them, and there were no distinguishing features at all. The man from inside was already coming when my hand touched the door handle. It seemed like someone had drawn that practice smile with a ruler across his face. He cast shadows in the wrong way with his teeth because they caught the light incorrectly. If I had changed, he inquired. The words sounded rather normal, but there was a faint echo created by a second voice speaking slightly out of time beneath them. Shaking my head, I climbed into the car and slammed the door so forcefully that the glass rattled. A blue vehicle appeared in the rearview mirror. It appeared out of nowhere, as though it had always been there and I had only just noticed it. The inside was perfectly illuminated by a dashboard glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, although there were no headlights. The silhouette of the driver didn't shift, didn't move, and didn't appear to breathe. I floored it after turning the key. Black and rubber splattered on the concrete as the tires screeched against the asphalt. The three figures stood motionless in the mirror, observing. The sedan took a while to follow. It waited until I was nearly at the highway before sliding along like something on rails and moving forward silently. My hands finally stopped shaking enough to see the speedometer after 20 meters. The sedan kept a perfect distance behind me, always 3 car widths back, even at 95 and up. Regardless of my speed, its shadow landed on the road incorrectly, reaching forward rather than backward and extending fingers of darkness toward my bumper. I noticed the receipt at that point. The wind crushed it flat as it fluttered across the windshield wiper, but it managed to stay in place. The printing was crisp and modern, but the paper appeared old, yellowed like the linoleum in the store. Even though I had never given it, my name was at the top. The timestamp displayed a list of the things I hadn't bought, down to the second of my arrival. You mean 3 bottles of water? 1 local road map. No maps have been shown to me. Just 1 reservation. What? 1 trip back. In spite of the breeze, the bottom was predetermined in crimson ink that appeared wet. Go back. With shaky hands, I grabbed the receipt as I pulled over at the next exit. The paper had a skin-like texture and felt unnaturally thick and slightly heated. The blue automobile was gone, but I could sense it lingering in the gap between the blind spots on the mirror behind me. When I looked at the receipts directly, the details changed. Similar to flies dispersing from light, words rearranged themselves. The timestamp now displayed the date for tomorrow, then dates that hadn't yet occurred the next week. Years would pass before it happened. The address of the store changed every time I blinked. Route 90, Route 285, and Route 54. I had never heard of these roads that may not be there. As I drove through the night, I only pulled over for gas at stations manned by actual people who looked at me, counted change, and whose footsteps matched mine. But I would discover something at every stop. The same message appeared on a napkin shoved in my gas cap, a leaflet stuck in my door handle, and a business card hidden beneath my wiper. Go back. In an attempt to get rid of something that wasn't following me in any way I could comprehend, I traveled 400 miles by morning, zigzagging throughout West Texas in illogical patterns. The dust on my hood, the moisture on my windows, and the arrangement of dead insects on my grill all had fresh messages that the morning sun unveiled. Return, return, return. Desperate for normalcy, for witnesses, for the everyday turmoil of human contact. I paused at a Fort Stockton cafe. As sickly yellow as those fluorescent lights, the waitress's coffee heated. Talking at frequencies that made my teeth hurt, the other customers moved in time with the well-known unsynchronized gait. Everything on the menu was water when I glanced at it. Water bottles. Warm water. Water that had a memory of being something other. The weight of the receipt in my pocket had increased. I sensed it drawing back toward the west, toward the unmarked station squatting in the desert, but not down. Like a rubber band stretched past its breaking point, the tug got stronger the farther I put between us. It's been 3 days, or perhaps 3 hours, since I started driving. Since the station, time stutters forward and backward like a broken film reel. When I look at the rear view, I see the blue car and windows, puddles, mirrors that shouldn't be there, and my own image. I occasionally see myself glancing back at myself with that cultivated smile. I drove it. The receipt has evolved into multiple receipts. They proliferate between the pages of my owner's manual, in my glove box, and in my pockets. Each one depicts distinct objects, times, and variations of events that have previously occurred or have not yet occurred. One displays 1987 as the purchase date, another 2047. They all come to the same conclusion. Go back. At that station, I am aware of what awaits. Not demise. It would be too easy, too definitive. Something different. An unfinished transaction that was initiated. Before I was born, a reservation was made in my name. A voyage back to a place that lives between the highway lines, between the ringing of bells and their echo. Once more, perhaps for the first time, the sun sets. Every road returns to that concrete box, even though the desert extends in all directions. That coffee on its hot dish, blazing forever, that yellow brightness. Now the steering wheel rotates on its own. Gentle corrections in a language older than words that seem like invitations, suggestions, or orders. Either I'm driving it, it's driving me, or the blue sedan is no longer there in the mirror. With every mile that goes by, every repeated receipt, every return to the starting point that hasn't yet occurred but has already occurred, the difference becomes less significant. On the horizon, just where it has always been and where it was before absent, the station emerges. My teeth are better at deciphering Morse code than my brain, as the lights flicker in that familiar regularity, writing out messages. In the void between sound and silence, the bell has been ringing and will continue to do so indefinitely. Watched by reflections that move when their owners are motionless, I either pull into the parking lot, or I never left, or I continue to select water from coolers that hum with mechanical agony. I'm holding a receipt that reads returned. Returning is what the one in my pocket says. Return is written in the one that hasn't been written yet. Now I get it. Water, change, or anything else that could be purchased or sold was never the subject of the transaction. It has to do with the actual return. The trip back to a location that is exclusive to the returnees. A loop that never closes to close. A receipt for an unfulfilled transaction that was finished before the deadline to proceed. Either I open the door or it opens. Or perhaps it's been open the entire time, just waiting for me to enter and discover that I'm already inside. In a stop that sits between the highway and the desert, selecting water from coolers that recall being something else. Between departing and returning, between the reflected and the real. The bell rings, pauses, and then rings again. Tires scream across asphalt as I drive off. My boots reverberate against the yellowed linoleum as I enter. A 20 that has been there since before the coffee started to burn is being left behind by me as I stand at the counter. My windshield flutters with the receipt, written and unwritten, new and old, saying what has always been said and always will be stated. Go back. The fifth story. The Chicago Blue Line station's fluorescent lights flickered in a certain pattern that makes you wonder if it's degradation or deliberate. 3:17 a.m. The station was deserted save for myself and the far off the sound of train or the city's circulation system digesting another night could have been heard. Once more, I stayed late at work troubleshooting code that appeared to reinvent itself whenever I turned my head. The particular tiredness that results from staring at computers in dimly lit spaces hurt my eyes. In a train window, I saw a reflection that reminded me of someone I had forgotten. They proceeded to division. All three of them were dressed in the polyester scarves that soccer supporters wrap around their bodies like protective gear. First came the odor, something sharper like copper coins and vinegar combined with stale beer. They produced their own rhythm that hurt my inner ear as they swayed both in and out of the train's motion. I hadn't even looked up from my phone, let alone spoken. However, one of they began chatting in an exaggerated accent, the tall one with the face that appeared to change characteristics when I wasn't looking at it. The way I still pronounced some consonants when I was fatigued, the Portuguese inflection I had worked years taming, my accent. I kept my eyes down, counting stops, and when the train lurched and the lights went out for exactly 2 seconds, the men were closer. Not dramatically closer, but close enough that I knew they'd moved without seeing it happen. Pleased to be excusing, he said to his friends, and they burst out laughing like breaking glass played backward. The problem was, I recognized the phrase. It was exactly what I'd said to a barista that morning, fumbling with my car to the register, word for word, inflection for inflection. Grand Station, 2 stops left. I stood, moving toward the door, and they stood, maintaining that careful distance that could be coincidence or threat. The tall one was speaking again, but this time it wasn't mimicry, but prediction. He was saying the exact thoughts running through my head, voiced in my accent a half second before I thought them. The middle one, whose face I couldn't quite hold in memory, even while looking at it, began humming. It was a song my grandmother used to sing while cooking. I hadn't heard it in 15 years. The station's architecture felt wrong. Too many corners, passages that shouldn't exist according to the map I'd memorized over 5 years of commuting commutes. I headed for what should have been the exit, but the corridor stretched longer than physics should allow. I jumped off at State Lake instead. Don't look back. Just need to get home. The platform was empty except for a janitor pushing a mop bucket that left no trail of water. The 3 men followed, their laughter now a physical presence that pressed against my eardrums like depth pressure. My phone vibrated, and the screen displayed an incoming call from my own number timestamped 2 minutes ago. Not 2 minutes from now, but 2 minutes ago, and I didn't answer. It seemed as though there were 6 of them now, or 9, or I had turned into a service alley between buildings, the kind of shortcut you're not supposed to know about, but every late-night commuter does. The sound of my footsteps came back incorrectly, not quite an echo, more like someone else walking in shoes exactly like mine, matching my gait, but offset by half a beat. The alley should have opened onto Franklin, but instead it continued, the walls breathing slightly in my peripheral vision. In an instant, the voicemail notification appeared. The laughter had ceased, but the silence was thick and expectant, like the pause before thunder. I could feel them behind me, not following, but already there, waiting in the pauses between seconds. On my right, a building with a lit lobby appeared. It was one of those places with 24-hour doormen that promise security in exchange for half your salary and rent. I rapped on the glass, probably looking exactly like what I was, a man in panic being chased by something he couldn't fully explain. No doorman. The lobby was lit, but empty. Then I heard my name, not yelled or muttered, but just stated matter of fact in my own voice, not from behind me, but from where I was standing, as if I'd said it myself without moving my mouth. The voice had the exact rasp I get when I've been talking too much, with a slight whistle on the S sound from when I broke my front tooth in college. My phone buzzed again, a text, this time from my number. Stop running from yourself. The doorman came in so abruptly that I nearly screamed. He was staring at me through the glass with the expression of someone who had been watching the entire time, and his face was familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I pushed inside, and the warmth hit me like a physical wall, but it was wrong warm, the kind that comes from too many bodies in too small space. He moved deliberately slowly, each motion seeming to require tremendous effort, as if he were pushing through thick liquid. The lock clicked 7 times. Buildings like this had 1 lock, maybe 2, 7 clicks, each deeper than the last, like tumblers falling in a mechanism much larger than a door. The lobby was still empty, and the laughter began again behind me. The men hadn't followed me in. They were already here, had always been here, and were waiting in the empty spaces between the furniture. The doorman was gone, or perhaps he had never been there. The desk where he should have been sitting was covered in dust that appeared to have accumulated for years, save for 3 handprints, new ones made by too many fingers. And I ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my footsteps echoing incorrectly once more. The hallway on the 4th floor stretched in both directions, lined with doors that all looked the same except for the numbers, which weren't in any order that made sense. For B, 9X, 2, Thursday, Mom's room, the one you don't open. My apartment should have been on the 7th floor of a different building 8 blocks away, but my key was already in my hand, and it fit perfectly into the lock of door 4B. The metal was warm, almost feverish, and inside was my apartment. Exactly my apartment down to the coffee mug. The phone rang, and I recognized the number on the caller ID. My childhood home, which had been demolished to make way for a parking structure in 2015. I answered. The voice on the other end was my grandmother's, left on the counter that morning, still half full and growing a skin of milk, but the windows showed the wrong view. Not the city, but the inside of another apartment where someone who looked like me, but wasn't quite, was staring back through their window at me. However, she replied, "You're home late," using my current tone and tired rasp. "The others are already here," she said. I hadn't in the living room. I hung up, and the laughter continued. The bathroom mirror showed my reflection, but he was already brushing his teeth, getting ready for bed. He looked well rested, like he'd been home for hours. He smiled at me with too many teeth, all mine. I heard not 3 voices, but dozens, all mine from different ages. That was me laughing at cartoons when I was 5 years old. Teenage me's nervous laugh before first date. The bitter laugh from after the divorce. Backing into the kitchen, I heard the refrigerator humming in unison with itself. 3 distinct notes that shouldn't have come from a single appliance. And saw that every shelf was stocked with identical takeout containers from the restaurant I had ordered from tonight, all of which had receipts dated tomorrow. The front door opened, and I entered the room looking just as worn out as I felt, carrying my laptop bag and wearing my jacket that didn't acknowledge me, just walked by and fell asleep on the couch. A second door opened, one that hadn't been in the wall before, and another me came in, this time wearing gym clothes I'd thrown away years ago. They kept coming, ignoring each other, and going about their daily lives as if they were alone. The apartment was filled with slightly different versions of me. One had my face, but moved with someone else's mannerisms. Another had perfect features, but my exact method of cracking my knuckles when I was anxious, and so on, until the space could no longer accommodate them all. Eventually, though, it expanded inward like inch drawing. My phone buzzed, and I heard a message from myself. Check your voicemail. You're listening to this and wondering if you're having a breakdown. You're not. You're having a breakthrough. The barriers were thinner tonight. The alcohol helped even though you didn't drink. Their laughter was the key. Even though they weren't real, you're home now, even though you never left. Stop trying to understand which one you are. Start accepting that you're all of them. That was my voice, though, speaking words I was thinking at the time, as if my thoughts were being broadcast from the past. The building was breathing now, really breathing, and I could hear its heartbeat in the walls. Or maybe it was my heartbeat, or maybe there was no difference anymore. The lobby was now filled with doormen, all of them with that almost familiar face, all of them watching me with the patience of people who knew how this ended. The front door was open, the street beyond looked like Chicago but felt like nowhere, and the skyline was familiar. Everyone turned to look at me, and they all smiled with recognition that felt like drowning. When I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, one of those fluorescent oases that promised normalcy in human contact, all of my instincts told me to floor it, to put as much distance between myself and whatever was happening in that circle of light as possible. 5 miles down the road, the attendant, a young man who couldn't have been older than 20, looked up from his phone when I entered, and I must have looked bad because his expression changed from boredom to concern. He told me I was white as a sheet, and I nearly laughed when he asked if I needed him to call someone. I bought a coffee I didn't want and sat in my car under the harsh lights of the station canopy, watching the road I'd come from. Part of me expected to see those headlights appear, expected the sedan to pull in beside me. Duckers still open, still empty, but nothing came. After an hour, I drove on, took the long way home, and avoided that stretch of road entirely. Who would I call? The police? Tell them what exactly? That a car had followed me and then vanished? That fence post had vibrated? That an empty vehicle was driving itself in circles? The satellite image showed the circle clearly, with 3 exits exactly as I remembered, but in the middle of the roundabout, where there should have been grass or decorative landscaping, there was something else. The image was too pixelated to make out clearly, but looked like marks in the earth, patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like tracks worn by something circling endlessly. 3 days later, I looked up the location on Google Maps to make sure the roundabout existed and that I hadn't imagined the whole thing, beginning at the outer edge and spiraling inward to a dark area in the precise center. The marks created a flawless spiral. The picture has a date stamp from 2 years prior, though I had to drive through the region once more for work the next week. I promised myself that I would follow the same path and demonstrate to myself that it had been fatigue, stress, or some other type of breakdown. However, my hand unconsciously led me off course when I got to the turnoff, adding 40 minutes to my travel time. Since then, I've passed that turnoff 6 times without ever taking it. When I can't sleep in the middle of the night, I sometimes imagine the sedan still circling with the door open, waiting for whatever was supposed to get in or whatever had gotten out. I imagine those fence posts indicating the return path by vibrating. The radio's rhythmic, persistent static comes to mind, as if it were attempting to convey a vital message that I was too human to comprehend. A co-worker suggested using that path as a shortcut last month, trying to appear informal. I asked him whether he had seen anything out of the ordinary about the roundabout. He gave me an odd look and claimed that the road was a straight line between 2 farms rather than a roundabout. Was correct when he insisted on showing me on the GPS on his phone. No 3 exits, no circle, just unbroken tarmac. But what I observed is known to me. I understand how I felt. I occasionally question whether I'm still in that roundabout when I'm driving alone at night, and a car emerges in my rearview mirror, following too closely. If the exit I took only led farther around the circle, if I never truly left. Lately, the fence posts outside my house have begun to hum. Only once in a while, for a brief moment, and always at night. They seem to be sending a message down the line because of the rhythm's familiarity, sequentiality, and purpose. When it occurs, I no longer gaze out the window. I'm terrified of what I could see in the distance, terrified of lights showing up where none should, fearful of identifying a black automobile with its door ajar, circling indefinitely, perhaps anticipating my return or someone or something claiming it. Since that night, my car's radio hasn't functioned properly. It always turns on to the same rhythmic pattern, to static and at random. Like a question I can't answer or a heartbeat that isn't mine. Thump, thump, thump. It's like an invitation that I'm afraid to accept, but equally afraid to turn down since I'm discovering that some circles aren't intended to be broken. Once you see a pattern, it becomes a part of you. Additionally, certain routes never truly let you go, even if they are erased from memory and maps. They simply wait for you to finish the rotation you initiated patiently and eternally. The 7th story. The first thing that struck me was the smell of diesel, which was thick and unpleasant, like something that had been decaying in metal for decades. Our rental SUV was parked at the entrance to the remnants of Copper Creek. When the silver ran out in the 1890s, this Colorado mining town vanished. Although none of us mentioned the strange warmth that seemed to emanate from the deserted buildings up ahead, my 3 geological survey team members stood next to me, their breaths audible in the thin mountain air. I had recommended this diversion. I still feel the guilt of that choice like shattered glass in my stomach. The town spread out in front of us in different states of ruin. Wooden buildings that are bucking the passage of time. More than a century of high-altitude sunlight faded their boards gray. Dark, vacant windows gazed back at us, aside from a sporadic flash of light that gave the impression that something had just shifted out of the glass. The smell of diesel wasn't the only thing carried by the wind. It was not the only item beneath it. Chemical and sweet, like rotting fruit combined with antifreeze. My co-worker gestured toward the former business store. Surprisingly intact was its facade. I saw it at that moment. The outfit in orange. It swayed in a wind I couldn't control as it dangled at ground level between 2 fallen buildings that since. The fabric had a fresh appearance. In the afternoon sun, industrial orange was so glaring that it was painful to look at. My skin crawled, though, because of the way it moved, as though someone were crawling inside it and pushing forward on their belly. The material twisted and twisted. Despite this, the outfit never really moved. Squinting to make sense of what I was seeing, I took a step forward, with the arms stretching and retracting in a terrible beat that made me think of a bug attempting to escape its chrysalis. The jumpsuit resumed its hideous pantomime, with the chest area pushing out and then collapsing. When my coworker touched my shoulder, I realized I had been unintentionally approaching it. We went out. No. My phone rang again, and the caller ID simply said. I stepped outside, and the 3 soccer fans were still laughing, but now I could see their faces clearly, and they were all mine, me at different ages, different weights, and different stages of exhaustion. They waved, a coordinated gesture that I felt my own arm wanting to complete. "We've been waiting for you to catch up," I said, "Welcome home." And even though I wasn't speaking, I could feel my mouth moving in response. The city surrounding me was crowded with my footsteps, past and future, all walking in different directions, all leading to the same place. Every reflection in every window was me, but not like twins in a photograph, where you can't tell which is which because they're both neither and both. I'm still walking, or perhaps I'm already at home, or perhaps I never left the train, and the fluorescent lights are still flickering in that rhythm that makes you wonder if it's intentional or decay. The laughter goes on everywhere, and it sounds exactly like me when I realize a joke I should have understood years ago, when I realize I'm the punchline, and it sounds exactly like story 6. My speedometer read 65, then 70, then 75, and the sedan matched every adjustment, keeping that suffocating distance as if we were bound by an invisible tether. I had been driving through rural Idaho for 3 hours when the black sedan appeared. In that time, the road behind me was empty, and then those twin lights filled my mirror so close I couldn't see the grille and could only see the harsh glare that turned my car's interior into a stark theater of shadows. They weren't just following me. They were breathing down my neck like something alive and hungry. I could taste copper in my mouth, that metallic tang of fear that comes when your body knows something your mind hasn't yet come to terms with. The road ahead curved through potato fields and abandoned farmhouses, their broken windows catching my headlights like dead eyes, opening and closing. The roundabout looked like a promise of escape, with its 3 exits radiating into different directions of darkness. I'd passed through here years ago, remembering it as an ordinary traffic circle where farm roads intersected, but tonight it seemed to pulse with possibility. I entered without signaling, tires humming against the worn asphalt, and the sedan followed. On the second rotation, I saw the headlights behind me sweep like a predator testing its prey. Suddenly, as if someone had thrown a switch, the lights behind me died. I could still feel the weight of that presence and hear the faint growl of an engine that wasn't mine. The hair on my forearm remained rigid under my jacket. On the third rotation, I strained to see in the mirror and saw nothing but the red glow of my own tail lights painting the empty road. The sedan had disappeared, not turned off, not pulled away, but just stopped driving. Exist in the space it had occupied seconds before. I took the gravel exit, my hands shaking against the steering wheel, my knuckles white as bone. A quarter of a mile down, the cattle pen appeared in my headlights, its rusted wire and weathered post familiar from a dozen drives through this area. The cattle guard rattled beneath my tires as I pulled alongside the fence, that hollow metallic sound that always reminded me of xylophones made from pipes. I needed to stop, breathe, and persuade myself that there was a logical explanation for what had just happened. The engine ticked as it cooled, and there was silence against the windows, that total lack of sound that only exists in places where humanity has barely made a dent. I hadn't touched the dial, and the radio had been off since I'd started driving, preferring the silence to help me think through the meeting I'd attended in Boise. But now it breathed that electronic rhythm into the car's interior, and the green display showed no station, no frequency, just dashes where numbers should be. There were no insects, no wind, and no distant traffic, just the weight of nothingness pressing against my eardrums until they ached. It wasn't music or voices, but rather a rhythmic static that pulsed like someone tapping on a microphone. I reached for the power button. The tapping grew louder, almost desperate, like someone desperate to communicate. My finger lingered over the button, but I didn't press it. Something in that rhythm felt significant, like a warning or a plea, or perhaps both. I caught a glimpse of movement as the fence post began to vibrate. Not all at once, but in a slow, methodical, and deliberate manner, beginning at the far end near the road, and moving toward me like a set of wooden wire dominoes. Each post hummed for a second before passing the vibration to the next, the wire between them singing a low metallic note that made my teeth hurt. The vibration reached the post closest to my car and stopped. The wire still hummed, but it was softer now, as if it was waiting. The radio attic changed, became almost questioning, thump, thump, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't name. Light exploded in the distance. The roundabout I'd left behind, maybe half a mile back down the road, suddenly blazed with illumination. Every street light, lights I hadn't even noticed in my panic, flared to life simultaneously, creating a perfect circle of brightness, and the sedan was there, circling the roundabout in an endless loop. And even from this distance, I could see it clearly in that unnatural brightness, with the black paint gleaming, moving at a constant speed, never changing, never stopping, and the driver's door hanging open, swinging slightly with each rotation, revealing an empty seat, no hands on the wheel, no shadow of a person inside. It looked wrong, staged, like someone had dropped the spotlight on a single point of interest in an otherwise empty theater. My body knew that something fundamental had changed, that the rules I'd lived by for 37 years no longer applied. The air in the car felt thicker, harder to breathe, like the atmosphere pressure had changed. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by something that didn't need eyes to see. The lights were on a timer. The car was on some sort of autopilot, maybe a Tesla, though it hadn't looked modern enough for that technology. Thump, 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 thump. And I found myself answering aloud, my voice cracking in the silence, asking what it wanted, telling it I didn't understand, pleading for it to make sense. The fence post started vibrating again, but backwards this time from where I was standing toward the road, as if they were pointing the way back. I started the engine, and the radio instantly went silent, cutting off mid-thump. The fence ceased, but the roundabout blazed with light, and the sedan drove on its never-ending circle, its doors swinging mechanically. I was beginning to believe that we weren't supposed to know, that perhaps there are things that exist in the liminal regions between reality and possibility, and that focusing too much on them allows them to stare back. However, it isn't actually the case. In actuality, I'm aware of its meaning. It indicates that we returned from Copper Creek with something that is not constrained by time or distance. All it has is the ability to leave 3-fingered handprints, something that wears orange jumpsuits, because if it was ever human at all, that's what it was wearing when it stopped being human. To be honest, I dream about those Colorado mountains every night. Additionally, the diesel scent is more powerful in my nightmares that I hear breathing within that jumpsuit in my nightmares. Respiration that sounds like it's coming through liquid and is wet and laborious. I realize that the handprints aren't attempting to enter in my dreams. What is already theirs is being marked. I discovered an orange thread on my pillow this morning. Only one synthetic thread, the type seen in industrial safety gear. When I took it up, it was still wet with that same oil, fresh enough to leave a stain on my fingertips. Hours have been spent sitting here looking at it, trying to persuade myself that it was caused by anything else. Anything else? However, I am more knowledgeable. Now we all know better that we're not done with whatever it is that climbed inside that jumpsuit and what we saw in Copper Creek. Perhaps it won't be. Perhaps it is the true terror. We were always supposed to locate it, not that it followed us home. It knew that someone would eventually come, see it, and bring it back into the world. So it waited there in that dead town, patient as stone. There is movement in the thread, just a little writhing, nothing more. It's as if something little is creeping along its length. I ought to destroy it, that I ought to set everything on fire. My gear, my clothes from that trip, and possibly the entire house. However, I want as I have a need to know what will happen next. A part of me has already come to terms with the fact that by suggesting that detour, I embraced whatever was coming. Perhaps the worst realization of all is that I'm not quite able to access that on some level. I was aware of what we would discover. I wanted to take something home because I felt like I recognized it there. My Windows handprints are shifting once more. They now display where patterns that I can identify. The patches, the tiny spots go really well with my work gloves. The same ones I wore in Copper Creek. When I looked at them this morning, they only had 3 fingers. The 8th story. My first caution ought to have come from the windshield. It's not truly a windshield. When I first moved in, there was only a piece of thick canvas material hanging from the front door doorknob. It must have been left by the previous tenant. Something about its worn texture and the way it caught the Pennsylvania fall light made me decide to leave it alone, even though I kept meaning to toss it away. before it began to move on its own. That is, the reason I rented the residence was it was affordable and remote, just what I needed following the divorce. As if to explain the low price, the realtor had mentioned that property was half a mile near the now-defunct Willowbrook State Hospital. I didn't give a damn. Since 1987, the hospital has been closed. Behind chain-link walls, just another remnant of Pennsylvania's institutional past. Through the trees, I could see its eastern wing from my kitchen window, broken windows staring at me like dead eyes. The initial 3 weeks went flawlessly. During the day, I worked from home creating websites, and in the evenings, I drank beer on the porch while watching the sun set behind the silhouette of the hospital. Like all old houses, the house settled and creaked, a shudder shook the pipes as the furnace turned on. Typical noises, even reassuring. Then that October Tuesday night arrived. I had my headphones on and was working late when I noticed something moving in the corner of my eye and looked up. The strip of cloth on the door was whirling and steady, purposeful circles rather than swinging in a breeze. Pause clockwise, in the opposite direction. The entrance door was shut. The windows were closed to keep the cold out. There was no draft that could explain it. After taking off my headphones, I went to the door. As soon as I touched the handle, the material stopped moving. There was no breeze at all, and the night was quiet outside. I reasoned that it had to be the heating system's air pressure, a peculiarity of the ventilation system in the ancient house. However, as I returned to my desk, my hands began to shake a little. That was the start. I began to notice things throughout the course of the following few evenings. At first, subtle. When there was nobody outside, a shadow moved beneath the door. The feeling of being observed from the deserted corridor. After dusk, the home had a peculiar feeling, as though it were waiting and holding its breath. Around 3 in the morning on Thursday of the next week, the footsteps began. Up the stairs were heavy, slow, and deliberate with each step. Not the old wood creaking at random. This had a beat and a goal. I listened to them climb while I lay motionless in bed. 1, 2, 3. At the landing, they came to a halt. The door to my bedroom was thrown and cracked open. The dim hallway light I normally left on was visible. A shadow passed through the opening. I dragged myself to my feet and picked up the baseball bat I kept next to the bed. I slipped to the door, my bare feet silent on the chilly floor. The corridor in front of me was deserted, but for a gray sweatshirt that vanished around a turn. There was only a glimpse of gray fabric before it disappeared. I looked through every door, window, and room. Nothing. No indications of ingress. The cloth strip hung still, and the front door remained locked. Feeling silly, but unable to get rid of the sense that someone had been in my house, I called the police at dawn. The officers were dubious, but professional. They discovered nothing missing, no footsteps in the dust of empty rooms, and no signs of forced entry. An elderly man with gentle eyes said I might have been having hallucinations. No debate, just talk. For adults, specialists who had worked in isolated areas for years nearly ran back to our car like frightened animals. I reversed out of there quicker than was prudent on the small mountain road when the engine overturned on the third attempt. After 20 minutes on the highway, someone finally said anything. 2 words that worsened the situation. It's damp. It was a clear, dry night, but the windshield was soaked, condensation splattering across the glass from the inside. At this altitude, the humidity is almost zero. The dampness continued to spread even after I turned up the defroster. At that point, we were able to see them properly dot fingerprints. Tiny, greasy handprints from the outside brushed against the glass. They smeared and overlapped in dozens. Although they were child-sized, their fingers were unusually long and slender, and their proportions were askew. At the next open area in the road, I stopped. All 4 of us exited, moving cautiously, as people do when they're trying not to panic. In addition to the windshield, the handprints were on every window, including the rear glass, which we had missed during our getaway. They were oily, like motor oil on water. They left a rainbow sheen in the moonlight. However, they are smooth, featureless impressions rather than fingerprints. Using his sleeve and paper towels from the glove compartment, my colleague attempted to remove them. Although it spread, the oil refused to absorb. Our bottles of water rolled off, and beat it up. Grease was just swept around in sickly swirling patterns by the windshield washer fluid, which ordinarily had the ability to cut through anything. We used the tiny, clear spaces between handprints to guide us as we drove the remaining distance to Denver in quiet. We parked beneath the brightest lights we could find at a 24-hour supermarket on the outskirts of the city. The handprints appeared to be glowing, throbbing with their own horrible light due to the fluorescent brightness. While late-night shoppers gave us wide berths, we went inside and purchased every cleaning item we could find, including bleach, ammonia, industrial degreaser, and even oven cleanser. We then scrubbed for 2 hours in the parking lot. Nothing was successful. The grease remained motionless that defies logic and chemistry. We finally gave up, weary and reeked of chemicals. We decided to handle it in the morning after finding a motel and booking separate rooms. I had trouble falling asleep. I could see that orange jumpsuit twisting and squirming in place every time I closed my eyes. Approximately 3 in the morning. I gave up and made my way back to the parking area to see how the SUV was doing. In the chilly, pre-dawn air, something had shifted, but the handprints remained. In some way, they had solidified, becoming more distinct. That's when I noticed it, the way it feels. Gloves were now clearly imprinted on each print, with stitching evident throughout the seams. Gloves for kids, gloves for winter, perhaps the ones with cartoon characters on them. However, only 3 fingers were present on each glove. My breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with the altitude as I stood there in that deserted parking lot. 3 fingers. Not because they were absent, but rather because that is how they were formed and designed. The expert, flawless stitching followed the curves of those unnatural hands. The prints had changed once more by dawn. They now displayed signs of wear, including patches where repairs had been performed and thin areas where the cloth had deteriorated. Some featured small labels that were readily visible but had writing that was too small to read. Before our eyes, they were aging, displaying hours of use over years. My co-workers discovered me sitting on the curb, gazing at the car. When he showed me the screen of his phone, which was out snapping pictures, the glass simply appeared to be filthy. Just ordinary grime. No glove impressions, no handprints. 3 different cameras were tested, but the outcome was the same. Technology couldn't capture what we were seeing. After charging us for the car, the rental company claimed that we had returned it because it was tainted with an unidentified material that was impossible to get rid of. They had to crush it for scrap and total it. The insurance claim was turned down. However, that isn't what keeps me up at night. When I unloaded my equipment at home, that's what I discovered. The similar greasy residue was found inside the sterile containers containing my geological samples from the survey. I had gathered the samples prior to our visit to Copper Creek. Although the containers' timestamps indicated dates from a week ago, the oil was still spreading and fresh. I had 3 different labs analyze them. Each produced a different outcome. According to the first, it was synthetic motor oil combined with unidentified chemical substances. According to the second, it was biological sebaceous secretions, but they were from an unidentified species. The analysis was not finished by the third lab. My samples were just returned with a note from them. Do not get in touch with us again, please. 6 months have passed since then. The oil continues to spread. It shows up on items I haven't handled in years, in spaces that I haven't visited. It has wet my winter gloves, which I had kept in the attic since I came to Arizona. I occasionally discover fresh handprints on my windows in the middle of the night. An hour before, there were no 3 fingerprints that I've given up on cleaning them. I've given up trying to comprehend. However, the image of that jumpsuit creeping around in a deserted town that shouldn't smell like diesel keeps coming to mind. I keep wondering what was within and what was attempting to escape. One of my co-workers from that trip called me last week. I couldn't explain over the phone, he added in a whisper. He looked like he hadn't slept for days when I met him at a cafe outside of Phoenix. He showed me a video from a security camera at his daughter's daycare after taking out his phone. The black and white, blurry video was sufficiently clear. 8:03 in the morning, a figure in an orange jumpsuit crawled across the parking lot. Moving just as the one we had observed in Copper Creek. That dreadful dragging motion of an insect. In reality, though, this one was moving, covering ground and leaving a wet, dark trail in its wake. It was recorded on the same night that we had left the ghost town, according to the timestamp. We were cleaning the windshield in that grocery parking lot in Denver at the same precise moment. Maine is 3,000 meters away from Colorado, where his daughter attends daycare. "What do you think it means?" he said. I was honest with him and admitted that I was unaware.
Living alone in a remote location, he said softly, stress from the divorce. It occurs. However, I was aware of what I had seen and heard. I added security bars and new locks to the windows on the bottom floor. I purchased a camera for the hallway and motion-activated lights for the exterior. There was nothing for several nights. I began to calm down and even felt ashamed of my stress. Then my blood turned to icy water because of what the camera caught. 3:17 a.m. A person wearing a gray hoodie passed the camera with the same methodical gait, the hood covering their face that I heard the pace on the stairs. But this is what caused my hands to shake as I repeatedly played the video. After appearing at the top of the stairs and walking down the corridor, the person just vanished. No door opened, no one left, as if it had vanished into the walls. For the remainder of that night and the following, I was awake. I finally got a piece of the puzzle from my neighbor, old Raymond, who lived on the farm up the road. One afternoon, he came by to return a wheelbarrow that he had borrowed, and he inquired whether I was feeling okay, so I must have looked like hell. I might have been hearing things at night when I said that I had been having problems falling asleep. His grizzled face went very seriously. At that time, he told me about the 74 kidnapping. He claimed that a dangerous Willowbrook patient had gotten away during a transfer, seized a maintenance worker just outside the hospital. 3 days later, they discovered the worker's body in the forest. However, the patient was never apprehended. I could detect the scent of tobacco on Raymond's breath as he leaned closer. The problem was that this residence had been occupied by the maintenance guy, he claimed. My home, back when key staff members were still housed at the hospital. I told him he was pulling my leg while laughing uneasily. Raymond, however, was not grinning. People here had stories, he remarked. When a house was unoccupied, the windows and lights moved by themselves. The family who occupied this space in the 1990s left after 6 months. Clothing, furniture, and even their feline. I kept thinking about Raymond's narrative after he left. I ended myself looking through ancient newspaper archives on my laptop that evening. The abduction was authentic. Despite the lack of specifics, I managed to locate the articles. Name of patient not disclosed. A maintenance worker was discovered dead. The investigation is still under progress. However, what I discovered the next day was what truly broke my hold on logical justification. I discovered the attic access panel above the stairs wasn't sitting flush while I was repairing a leak in the upstairs bathroom. My hand struck something stuck in the insulation when I climbed up to adjust it. An aged, yellowed ID badge that was laminated. The writing was still readable, but the picture was too blurry to read well. A name I had never heard of. Ward C. Willowbrook State Hospital is located beneath it. As I descended, my hands trembled. I had done enough study to know that the violent cases were confined in Ward C, which was the maximum security wing. How come this was in my attic? There, who had concealed it? I didn't even pretend to sleep that night. I watched the fabric strip on the door while sitting on the couch in the living room with all the lights on and the baseball bat resting across my knees. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion began to tug at me. Despite the lights and the terror, my eyes became drowsy. I must have fallen asleep for a second because when I woke up, the room was darker. The cloth strip was moving again and several bulbs had burned out at once. However, it wasn't this time that arbitrary. It turned and twisted in certain patterns while I gazed, motionless. The shadows it created on the door, the way it captured the last of the light. They repeatedly produced letters, shapes, and S, T, and Y. Remain. 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 I sprinted, picked up my phone and keys, and hurried to my car without even putting on my shoes. I took a car to a motel 20 meters away and registered using a fictitious identity. I'm worried that someone might be following me. Here's the problem, though. I returned. In the bright dawn of the following day, 2 returned since my laptop was there. My life my job, and because everything looked unattainable in the bright daylight. A collapse brought on by stress, perhaps. Isolation and Raymond's ghost story caused hallucinations. I left the house just as I'd found it. The door is still locked, the lights remain on, and the innocent-looking cloth strip is still hanging. I gathered my work supplies, packed my luggage, and promised myself that I would remain at the motel until I could find another accommodation. However, something forced me to take another look at the cloth strip as I was leaving. It had marks on it that I had never seen before in the midday sun. Letters hardly noticeable and faint brown streaks that could have been rust or something else visible around the edge, scrawled in fading pen. The name on the ID badge is the same. I stared at that piece of cloth as I stood at my doorway, bag in hand. What is the evidence? That there had been a patient. That a memento had been retained by the maintenance guy. That something remained, had never gone, or was requesting that I stay, or that someone was telling a complex, nasty joke. I've spent the last 3 days at the motel. I informed the realtor over the phone that I was violating the lease. Although she didn't appear startled, I dream about that house every night, including gray sweatshirts, wind chimes, footsteps on the staircase, and words written in shadow. And I wake up every morning knowing with all my heart that I will return. This is the reason I can't stop thinking about it. What would happen if it didn't tell me to stay? Could it be pleading? What if the person haunting that house isn't the patient who managed to leave after all, but rather the maintenance worker who never actually left, stuck in some way, trying to warn others, and using whatever tools it has to type out desperate messages? Perhaps I simply convince myself that because the alternative is worse, that despite all reasonable thoughts and the fear that makes my stomach turn to acid, I will return because there is something in that house that needs and wants me there, due to the pull being too great. Since I may not have truly left at all, a part of me needs to know. Tomorrow, check out of the motel. In order to handle the paperwork for terminating the lease, the realtor says she will meet me at the house. However, I already know what will occur. When she gets there, she'll see my car in the driveway with the front door open and that strip of fabric spinning in circles. I'll be inside, contributing to the tale that home has been narrating for many years. Even worse, I can sense that I'm coming to terms with it. Something else is replacing the fear, perhaps out of curiosity or resignation, or maybe it's acknowledgement. It's possible that certain homes select their occupants, and some residents were destined to remain.